Today, I am covering a brand new series by HistoryMarche, and this one's The History of the Third Crusade, which is an event that I've covered a few times on this channel. I covered Extra History's Saladin series, which touched on this, and I've watched The Kingdom of Heaven. Well, granted, it takes place before the Third Crusade, but it's what I mean by that is that it sets up the events leading into it. And I watched the Kingdom of Heaven movie, which leads up to it. I also watched the Baldwin battle, Montegard, where him and Saladin battled. So I've definitely covered Saladin and touched on this subject, and I said the closest to the Third Crusade we've got it is the Saladin series by Extra History, but this will be really cool because this is going to be covering, no doubt, the actual battles and sieges that took place. And really what I'm most enthusiastic about is learning about, like, Saladin and Richard the Lionheart's rivalry, because these guys are kind of known to be rivals, worthy adversaries to one another. And that's kind of like, it's mentioned as one of those, like, rivalries that, are very legendary. So that's actually what I'm most looking forward into seeing a bit more of, because I'm watching all the parts in one sitting right here. It's an hour and 32 minutes, so yeah, I really want to get into it and really learn about everything that happened in this crusade. Now, before I get started, I just want to say, if you want to watch the original video by HistoryMarche, the link is down in the description down below, and if you enjoy my channel and you want to help me out in any way, shape, or form, feel free to please like, comment, subscribe, and maybe even consider becoming a member on Patreon. It's only for $1 a month, and you get early access to stuff, so it's pretty cool. Now, with that said, and now without any further ado, let's do
The Christian army was utterly destroyed in the Battle of Hattin on July 4th, 1187.
Yep. I've also covered the Battle of Hattin by HistoryMarche. I joke around and I often don't call it a battle. I call it a slaughter because this is like Saladin's crowning achievement on the battlefield. Just the way that he managed to just defeat the entire Christian army using the elements, using the smoke of fires, he said, catching them and depriving them of water. It really is it was masterfully executed. And definitely, I said, his crowning achievement overall in life is the seizure of Jerusalem. But I think on the battlefield, Hattin is, that's his Gargamella or Austerlitz,
Saladin, the champion of Islam, moved to reduce the remaining Christian holdings in the Holy Land. In mere months, Acre, Haifa, Caesarea, Jaffa, Sidon were in Muslim hands. In Jerusalem, Balian of Ibelin held out under siege until October, when he surrendered the city. Christians native to the city were permitted to stay, while the rest were escorted out, a testament to Saladin's peaceful takeover. But the well-fortified port of Tyre remained in Christian hands. Aboard a Genoese ship, a certain Frankish noble from northern Italy, Conrad of Montferrat, was just days from reaching Tyre. Successes against the armies of Frederick Barbarossa brought him fame and prestige, while his personality and good looks made him the darling of the court in Constantinople.
Interesting.
Now, with most of the Holy Land lost, and much of the Crusader leadership dead or captured, by pure chance Conrad emerged as the principal Christian leader in the Levant upon his arrival in Tyre in mid-July 1187. Across the Mediterranean Sea, word of the disastrous turn of events reached Pope Urban III, who allegedly died from shock upon hearing the news. 9 days later, on October 29th, 1187, his successor, Pope Gregory VIII, issued the papal bull Audita Tremendi, which pushed for a renewed crusade to retake Jerusalem.
And the stage is set.
Despite the disastrous Second Crusade of the 1140s, the interest in the Levant region and in maintaining the Crusader states remained stout and on the minds of many European rulers. Prince Richard, the future Lionheart, took the cross prematurely before the papal bull had even been issued. His father, King Henry II of England, and King Philippe II of France committed themselves to a new crusade on the urging of Jocelyn, Archbishop of Tyre, who had travelled to Europe from the Holy Land to ensure the two kings set their differences aside and help the relief in the east. Philippe d'Alsace, Count of Flanders, joined the enterprise soon after. The three men agreed with Henry's proposal to introduce a massive levy for the crusade, dubbed the Saladin Tithe. By July 6, 1189, however, King Henry II died, leaving his son, newly crowned King Richard I, to take up the responsibility of leading the English contingent in the Third Crusade. In Mainz, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa also took the cross and committed the German people to the new crusade. Meanwhile, in the Levant, Saladin released Guy of Lusignan from captivity in the summer of 1188. As per the terms of his release, Guy agreed not to take up arms against Saladin again.
If I remember, Guy actually accompanied on the Third Crusade, and if that's what I remember correctly, I think he actually went to Cyprus and was kind of like in charge of it there, but I do remember reading in the quick Wikipedia thing that he apparently did. I'm not sure to what capacity, but he was around still during the start of the Third Crusade, so I'm not sure if he completely breaks that that little promise he just made.
An oath he was quick to betray. He took his family and loyal followers up to Tripoli, where Balian of Ibelin had taken the Christian refugees from Jerusalem. Back in Tyre...
Yeah, while The Kingdom of Heaven is completely historically inaccurate, I'm really happy to have watched that movie. It kind of really reinvigorated my love for the Third Crusade. And, well, you know, this era in general, you know what I mean? And, yeah, it's also helped me kind of get into, like, wanting to learn more about this era, so, yeah, overall, very happy about that.
Conrad of Montferrat heavily fortified the ancient city and successfully held out against a 7-month siege by Saladin's army. The Sultan, meanwhile, launched a campaign into Syria, capturing city after city and fortress after fortress. Now, in the summer of 1189, Guy collected the troops from both Tripoli and Antioch and led his new army south to Tyre. As the ruler of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which Tyre was a part of, Guy had expected to take up residence in the city, but Conrad refused him entry.
Wow.
A fierce rivalry soon developed between the two men. Stuck outside Tyre until August 1189, Guy decided he could wait no longer.
Yeah, typical Guy L. I'm joking around, but yeah, Conrad definitely, as we kind of established, I don't really know about the guy, but like the reading I'm getting off the bat is, you know, he's very accomplished, kind of a rising star in Christendom, you know? Popular, charismatic, talented, accomplished apparently from past battles, so he's definitely the rising star of the Christian side it's coming across, and is setting to be, or priming to be, the new face, you know, the new leader of the Christians, something that Guy was as King of Jerusalem, but failed horribly So I'm wondering if this is kind of like a usurping from Conrad, like, hey, you failed, but I won't, so I'm the better, and I'm gonna prove that I'm better, and you know that I don't really know these guys. I don't know what they were thinking. It's kind of hard to analyze. That's just kind of like speculating. I'm guessing in my head of how maybe something that might be going on in Conrad's mind, but I don't know. That's kind of like the reading or the interpretation I'm kind of coming up with in my head.
He turned his army and marched on Acre to attempt to recapture the city and set up his base of operations there. With up to 700 knights and 9,000 levy infantry, Guy advanced along the Scandaleon Pass, a coastal road that kept away from the interior, where the lurking Saracen scouts kept a watchful eye. But the movements of the Crusaders were spotted after all, and the information relayed to Saladin. Strangely, the Sultan hesitated. Encamped at Belfort Castle, a strong defensible spot, he wondered if Guy's movement was an elaborate ruse intended to lure him away from this good position and render him vulnerable to attack from the north and south. The Crusaders eventually reached Acre. Over the coming days, they were joined by other contingents coming down the pass, as well as a Pisan force which chose to sail instead of march. Guy and his main host encamped on the ancient hill known as the Toron, climbing it by night to avoid detection. From the Toron, they had a clear view of the city and the Acre plain below. The position was highly defensible. The eastern edge of the Toron dropped steeply, making Guy's encampment immune from cavalry charges. Between the Toron and the city walls, Guy's main army encamped on August 28, 1189, marking the start of the siege of Acre. Upon learning of the siege, Saladin set out from Belfort Castle with his army, calling for additional soldiers throughout his empire to reinforce him. Men from Mosul, Sinjar, Diyarbakir, and elsewhere soon flocked to the Sultan's banner.
A part of me is expecting this to go horribly wrong for Guy, because again, Guy got wrecked when he was, in a much more powerful position as King of Jerusalem, or, pre-capture from Saladin, and the Battle of Hattin happened. Granted, you could say because of the Christians' hastiness to give battle that they put themselves in that awful position in the first place, so maybe Guy has been humbled enough and has learned a thing or two, but I don't know, Saladin is still an unstoppable force at the moment, and no doubt he can muster up a much more than Guy does. Well, Guy has he mentioned 9,000, but probably a bit reinforced now, but still, yeah, I don't feel like this is gonna go good for Guy, but we'll see if he's learned a thing or two after being humbled the first time by Saladin.
From his vantage point on the Toron, Guy watched as Muslim reinforcements gradually came into view, and the Christian warriors prayed to God to succor them. Saladin made his camp on August 30th at Tel Kaysan, close to Acre. The Muslim left wing spread across the Bilis River, with the right wing stretching to Tel al-Ayadir. In front of the main ranks was a stationary advance guard, whose orders were to harass the Crusader perimeter on a daily basis and prevent anyone from escaping the encirclement. Guy's army was now trapped between the defenders of Acre and Saladin's relief army.
It's true, and yeah, he could be attacked on both fronts, right? Because if the main army attacks, there's been times where this has happened, as we've seen in past videos, where the defenders can sally out and attack from the rear or be a nuisance on the back, so yeah, this is awful, dude. I feel like my prediction might be correct. Guy really, I don't know, might be in an awful position.
On September 1st, Guy launched an attack on the walls of Acre before the bulk of Saladin's army could arrive. Because his siege catapults were not yet complete, Guy relied on his infantry to carry the assault.
Yeah, this seems incredibly hasty. He's not even prepared for the siege because he doesn't have his equipment already, so now this comes across as, oh no, Saladin's about to trap me, I need to get the city quick, now he's floundering, which is never a good place to be in, and he's just gonna send men to die, and against the very, I'm assuming formidable defenses, so this will probably end up horribly.
They rushed forward with ladders to scale the city walls. From above, the defenders shot arrows, hurled rocks and other projectiles. The Christians pushed their way up, and a fierce melee broke out along the ramparts. The attack, however, was soon aborted after messengers brought news of Saladin's approaching main army. Fortunately for Guy, reinforcements were on their way, and not just from Tyre. In mid-September, a fleet from the west carrying Danes, Welsh and Cornish arrived. Days later, a second fleet, led by the Lord of Condé and Guise, James of Avesnes, was approaching. 50 ships strong, it carried between 12,000 and 14,000 Flemings, Frisians, Germans and Bretons.
Oh boy, okay, this is going a bit different than I expected. It seems like Saladin is still mustering up his force, but at the same time Guy's growing in strength as well, so this might end up becoming a more even fight than even I suspect. Or maybe Saladin will see all this growth and be like, maybe I should pull back for now, I don't know. Saladin does seem like that kind of cautious, but I guess we'll see.
James took control of the Crusaders' army's field operations after his arrival, sometimes sharing the responsibility with Ludwig III, Landgrave of Thuringia. Near the end of the month, more reinforcements arrived from Tyre, led by Conrad and Gerardo, Bishop of Ravenna. So many Christian ships were now moored in the bay and blockading Acre's harbour that their masts reminded one Muslim observer of tangled thickets. The Muslim leadership estimated the Crusader force to be 2,000 horse and 30,000 foot.
Holy crap.
Saladin met with his war council and decided it was time to test the strength of the Christians. On the morning of September 14th, the Sultan launched an attack on the Christian lines. He hoped to punch a hole through the siege works and drive on towards Acre. But the Crusaders stood firm and held back the Muslim tide. Saladin's cavalry, however, spotted a weakness in the enemy line north of the city and reinforced the attack there. After an hour of desperate fighting, the Christians were driven back. However, they soon reformed their battered lines, formed a shield wall mixed with crossbows and mounted lances, and regained the lost ground.
Alright, this is cool. This is quite the titanic struggle back and forth. Like a real tug of war right here. And again, Saladin just seems to kind of be feeling the enemy out, as he mentioned. Just like, okay, how capable are they at the moment? But, alright, I'll see.
2 days into the fight, Saladin was unable to break the Crusader siege lines. So he opted to extend his own lines to besiege the besiegers.
And now you are besieged. Oh boy, this is starting to get complicated. Kind of reminds me of Julius Caesar when he and like his siege of Alesia, you know.
His cavalry screen opened a line of communications and channel of supply with the city, but were unable to halt the steady stream of Christian reinforcements arriving by sea at regular intervals. The heavy ships also bore with them timber for the construction of heavy siege engines to batter Acre's walls. More alarming news came to Saladin when he learned that Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa had reached Constantinople in August with an army reportedly numbering 200,000 crusaders.
Holy crap. I wonder those numbers are inflated, because holy crap, yeah, all the Christian main guys are showing up all of a sudden. Wow.
The Ayyubid Sultan sent letters to emirs and caliphs throughout the length and breadth of the Muslim lands, begging for more troops to counter this new Christian threat. To his despair, he failed to garner additional support. Worse, he found the fidelity of some of his vassals wavering. Several emirs left him.
Yeah, I remember when we were covering the Saladin series by Extra History, Saladin was keeping the Muslim world together, but it was still very... I guess it was fragile in some senses, and you know what I mean by that is that, you know, kind of like with the Christian world, the whole Muslim world was a bit like, you know, there were rivalries and dynamics that didn't always work, and Saladin at times had to really juggle to keep his side together, and that's probably his greatest achievement in terms of how great of an administrator he was and keeping everyone together on his side. But I think you do see the cracks showing at times here. As the Christians are coming back, it's like the Empire Strikes Back, you know, and yeah, so some of his people aren't, you know, the most loyal, so yeah, it's a bit iffy, you know.
Muslim camp to prepare to defend their own homelands against Barbarossa. With their numbers and confidence bolstered, the Crusaders under Guy opted to attack Saladin's lines on the morning of Wednesday, October 4th, with the intent of reaching and destroying the Muslim camp at Tel al-Ayadiyah. The attacking force was arranged in 3 lines of the left, right, and center, with archers and crossbowmen in the first line, infantry in the second, and cavalry in the third. Conrad of Montferrat led the left wing of mostly Italians along the coastline, with Gerardo of Ravenna. The right wing extended to the Bilis River and was led by Guy. The cavalry on the right wing consisted of Knights Hospitaller, with Italian and French foot and missile troops. The center was near the mosque of Ain Bukr, outside the city walls, and was commanded by Andrew of Brienne and Ludwig III, sitting in the rear guard with their knights. Templar Grand Master Gerard of Riederfort led the center's vanguard. Catalan and German foot soldiers stood in front of the Templars. Remaining in camp as a check against sorties from the Acre garrison was Guy's brother, Geoffrey of Lusignan, accompanied by James of Avesnes and his men. Opposing the Crusaders were the divisions of Saladin's army. On their extreme right wing was the Sultan's nephew, Taqi al-Din. He and his men took position on the end of the line by the sea. On the near right were Saladin's sons, Al-Afdal and Al-Zahir. The rest of the right consisted of soldiers from Mosul, led by the Lord of Hizn Kaifa. The Muslim left wing was more diverse. On the far left, near the Bilis River, was a company from Asadiyah and the Mamluks of Asad al-Din Shirka, Saladin's deceased uncle. The near left had soldiers from Sinjar, led by Mujahid al-Din Yuran Kush, more Mamluks, and soldiers commanded by Muzaffar al-Din. There were other groups of Kurds. Emir Mujali led the Mihrani and Hakkari Kurds, while others were commanded by their chiefs. Saladin rode in the center, accompanied by his regular troops and a personal guard of military slaves. Each wing was protected by a thin line of skirmishers. The battle began at 9 a.m., when the Crusaders engaged the Muslim advance guard, quickly dispersing it. The Templars and Hospitallers riding through the enemy infantry and missile ranks. Fighting bogged down for 4 hours. In the afternoon, matters shifted when the Italians on the Crusader left wing managed to push forward into the Muslim right. And Taqi al-Din ordered his soldiers to pull back, attempting a feint to lure the Crusader wing away from the main army.
Ooh, the feigned retreat. A strategy that actually has been the bane of many many European armies. So that's pretty smart. They seem to have reserves, the Muslim side, so I'm wondering if this is to pull them away so they can try to use the reserves to go through a gap.
Saladin saw his nephew retire and assumed the worst, sending reinforcements from his own center to assist him. This was a...
Yeah, okay. He misread the situation.
critical error. Upon seeing the thinning ranks ahead of them, the Crusaders in the center and right moved ahead towards Saladin's position, hitting the Muslim line in the gap between the center and right wings. Crusader cavalry boldly charged between the thinning Muslim ranks, and foot soldiers kept a steady pace behind the knights. Christian infantry and cavalry charged simultaneously, crumbling the second enemy line.
Dang. You know, I thought the Muslims were gonna try to use the gap on this side, but it turns out that it was actually the Christians who utilized the gap, though, because Saladin weakened and himself there.
General rout began, with the right flank fleeing towards Tel al-Ayadiyah. Those from the center made for either Kahawana, across the bridge to Tiberias, or even Damascus. Those Muslims determined to stay in the fight were cut down. Others were caught at their tents and killed there. At this critical moment in the battle, however, the Crusaders who broke into the Muslim camp chose to loot the tents for booty, driven by both greed and hunger.
Dude, if I had a nickel for every time this happens, it's like anytime an army just gets to the camp, they just always resort to looting instead of continuing the momentum. I mean, I kind of get it, because, like, hey, if you're surrounded by all this richness, you're like, you know, I do kind of want this booty, but, like, you know, it's, you know, there were some systems and armies in the past that I kind of liked. Like, I think of Genghis Khan, for example. Like, what was his system when it came to looting? I could be wrong, but I'm remembering from the Extra History series, it was save the looting for the end, and everyone gathered the loot, and then we distributed. I mean, it worked wonders for him. Like, I'm like, but it seems like in a lot of times in history, yeah, at really important times in battles, armies would just resort to the looting instead of, like, continuing momentum. Again, it's understandable, I get it, but, like, you know, it's definitely at times cost armies dearly, or, you know, allowed enemies to recover more because they stopped in loot, you get me? So, I don't know.
The looting brought a halt to the Crusader charge, and all momentum in the battle was lost. Saladin, meanwhile, accompanied by only a few personal retainers, was busy trying to save his army, urging the Mamelukes and Kurds on the left wing to turn and join in the fight, and trying to rally the fleeing remnants of the center ranks. It was then that the Crusaders, busy feasting and looting the enemy camp, spotted the Acre garrison finally joining the fight from the city walls.
Oh my gosh.
All day the battle...
Holy crap, they're about to get hit from the rear, oh no.
...had favored the Crusaders, but their left wing was now fully sandwiched between the Acre garrison and Taqi al-Din's men.
Oh no.
Saladin seized the opportunity, sending his men forward into the disorganized enemy ranks. His left wing engaged, as did the rallied remnants of the center.
Yeah, this battle is a tug of war if I've ever seen one. It just keeps, like, going back and forth. But again, the lack of discipline here as I've said, we've seen this several times in several other videos where the looting and the drop of discipline will have been the undoing of armies, and it seems like this might be another example to add to the list. Because again, this seemed like a sure defeat for Saladin, but thanks to this, he can now rally back and actually, like, win. Wow. Dang.
The looters were caught in the tents, while those fleeing were caught from behind.
Oh boy.
As Saladin's left wing rolled up the center, the remaining Crusaders broke and were hurtled back towards Acre, with Muslim riders close behind. Making matters worse, the Crusader left wing eventually succumbed to pressure and retired to camp, allowing the Muslim right wing under Taqi al-Din to turn and hit their flank in a pincer movement. It was a massacre.
Oh.
The battle had turned, and the remaining Crusaders fled back towards Acre in a chaotic mass, their enemies in close pursuit. Saladin's men soon reached the outskirts of the Crusader camp, nearly pushing on to its tents. But instead, the Muslims withdrew and eventually retired from the field after Geoffrey of Lusignan's reserve force arrived to bolster the shaken Crusader ranks. Casualties in the October Battle of the Siege of Acre vary depending on the source. However, it can be estimated that around 7,000 Muslim and 10,000 Crusader troops perished in the gruesome clash of October 4th, 1189.
My goodness, holy crap.
After their defeat, the Crusader leadership ordered the troops to dig in for a prolonged siege, as there was little chance of quickly breaking through either Saladin's lines or Acre's walls. The Crusader camp had received some breathing room for expansion after Saladin's army began rearranging itself behind them. Further sea reinforcements arrived at the end of October, including numerous barons and 400 Danish warriors, accompanied by the nephew of King Canute VI. Crusaders now dug protective ditches on both sides of their tents. They filled these with sharpened stakes and metal running the length of the camp from the bay to the Mediterranean. These trenches were fronted by earthen ramparts and wooden palisades. Then came the rain squalls and heavy mists, heralding the coming of winter weather. As the year 1189 came to a close, nature brought relief to the Muslims. The brusque winter, although not snowy, brought with it winds strong enough to blow away tents atop the Tauron. Worse, Christian ships could not remain anchored due to the rough conditions. Most of the fleet thus left at the end of October or became fuel for campfires. But the situation in the city was becoming desperate. Cut off from supplies in the winter weather, the starved and desperate garrison of Acre opened negotiations with the Crusaders. The terms were simple. They would capitulate in exchange for their lives.
Why do I have a feeling... Okay, I don't know why, because of all the massacres I've seen, why do I have a feeling they may not be spared? I mean, hopefully they are, I'm just saying. I don't know why I'm getting the feeling that the Christians might go ham and just kill everybody. It's happened before, I'm like kind of used to it now, so I don't know. But who knows, I think this will surprise me, because I am actually being very surprised this entire encounter, like that last battle we just covered. Technically, I'd almost want to call it a draw, in a sense that, you know, both armies lived to fight another day, and it kind of returned back to the status quo of, you know, the Christians besieging and Saladin surrounding them, so it kind of returned to the way it was before the battle, so I almost don't want to call it a victory or defeat for either side. I don't know. I guess you could make an argument maybe of tactical victory for Saladin, or I don't know. I'm just gonna call it a draw for the sake. So yeah, this is really going back and forth, and like even the conditions here. Like on one hand, the winds are unfavorable to the Christians, but yet it's still working for Acker wanting to, make negotiate. So it really does. I keep using that phrase. It feels like a tug of war. It keeps shifting, and I'm not sure who's gaining the upper hand at any moment, and it seems to switch when someone is going to. So definitely all over the place.
This, however, was foolishly declined by the glory-seeking Crusaders.
Oh my gosh.
And fortunately for the garrison, Ayyubid reinforcements were en route from the sea.
Oh my gosh. You should have just said yes. Just been like, sure, why not? Oh man. I thought they were gonna say yes and then just kill them anyways. But even that would have been smarter than just saying straight up no when these guys are like ready to give in. Oh boy. If I had a nickel for every time the Crusaders made a really dumb decision because they just wanted more glory, I'd be the richest man alive. From all the times I've seen it in these Crusade videos. Come on, guys, just say yes. Get it. Who cares if it's not glorious? At least you have the city, right?
The daring Armenian Muslim admiral Hossam ad-Din Lulu saw a chance to whisk men and supplies into Acre without worrying about the heavy Crusader blockade.
Oh my gosh.
On December 17th, 1189, he led 50 Egyptian galleys into the harbour, using Greek fire to brush aside the few Crusader ships that engaged them. Acre's garrison cheered at the sight of the arriving fleet.
You idiots should have really just negotiated and taken the city. Oh my gosh. Sometimes I want to like slap my head when I'm covering the Crusades and the Christians just, oh my gosh. Like, guys.
The stalemate ended on Easter Sunday, March 25th, 1190, when a new Crusader fleet of 50 vessels from Tyre, led by Conrad of Montferrat, appeared off the Mediterranean coast, tacking south towards Acre. Guy of Lusignan and Conrad had reconciled their differences, and Conrad was on his way to support Guy's siege camp. Before navigating past Acre's port, Conrad's fleet was intercepted by Muslim ships. The naval battle lasted for the better part of the day, as Greek fire and volleys of arrows and bolts were exchanged. But the Christians managed to drive off the Muslim fleet and deliver the badly needed supplies and reinforcements to Guy's camp. Fresh Crusader troops continued to pour in throughout March and April, allowing Guy to stage surprise attacks that broke.
This really is a stalemate in every sense of the word. Each side keeps getting reinforced, each side gains momentum, loses momentum. It just keeps going and going. Like, this is a stalemate if I've ever seen one. Like, this is the best example I've seen on this channel. How can it end? Someone's gonna have to give in eventually, right? Someone's gonna have to pull out, but I don't know who. I don't know who will.
Saladin's supply lines and isolated Acre. The rainy days of spring soon turned into the warm months of summer, and the soggy ground dried out. The Crusaders constructed siege towers with wood brought by Italian merchant ships. 4 stories high and capable of holding up to 500 men, these movable towers loomed as high as the walls of Acre. They were covered with hides soaked in vinegar and urine, which the Crusaders believed provided protection from the defenders' Greek fire. The towers were ready by the end of April. The sight of the colossal contraption struck fear into the Acre garrison, who entered into a second negotiation with the Crusaders.
Oh my gosh. Alright. Yeah, the Crusaders are dead set on taking this city through force. They want the glory of that. And, I will say that siegecraft is honestly something that I've always been amazed by. Like, the most impressive, or my favorite siegecraft that we ever covered is probably from Alexander the Great and the Diadochi era. Not only because it's, like, my favorite era in history, but, like, just the revolutionary, contraptions that the Macedonians were using were cool. Especially, like, it was Demetrius, the son of Antigonus. He was kind of, like, beyond extra with his siege stuff. Like, the Siege of Rhodes, say no more, when he built a giant, holy crap, tower carried by ships all the way trying to take Rhodes. That's probably one of my most, um, I really love that. So I have to say, siegecraft is really cool.
Once again, though, the Crusaders refused, believing their siege engines would win them the glorious victory they craved.
Why am I getting a feeling that this is not going to work out well for the Crusaders? I don't know, I'm getting that feeling that they really should be taking these negotiations what they can. I'm kind of like face palming at the idea of them just keep refusing and making this even harder for themselves, but again, I guess they just really want that glory.
On May 5th, 1190, the Crusaders renewed the assault. As the massive towers rumbled forward, archers on the platforms battled against the Muslim bowmen on the walls. Meanwhile, thousands of Christian peasant soldiers and camp followers scurried to fill the city's moat with rocks and fascina of brush to allow the towers to pass over the ditch. Finally, the bridge from the first tower dropped on the city parapet. The Crusaders inside piled out onto the walls, but as they pushed their way further, a most horrific sight unfolded behind them. The defenders loaded their artillery with specially mixed explosive jars of Greek fire and fired them at lumbering towers. All 3 towers caught fire.
Oh my gosh, they literally had grenades. Holy crap. Oh, what a disaster for the Christians. Unless they find a way to put it out, but I don't know, bro. Greek fire it's kind of special in that sense, right? It's not something you could put out that easily compared to other fire. I think that's how it worked. Something like that, like it keeps burning. At least that's what I've heard, but yeah.
For a time, the wood creaked ominously, before one by one, the towers crumbled, with everyone inside cruelly perishing in the flames.
Oh, no.
Those Crusaders who managed to storm the walls from the first tower were subsequently cut down to a man and thrown off. The May 5th assault had failed miserably.
Why didn't you guys just take the offers?
Throughout June, the 2 armies clashed for 8 successive days, the heat baking the growing mounds of bodies piling around the siege camp and walls. Thick black clouds of flies floated around the dead, and disease gripped both Muslim and Christian camps alike. For nearly a month afterwards, little action took place. Tired of the waiting game, Crusader men-at-arms opted for another assault on St. James's Day, July 25th. Their goal was to punch through the Muslim lines north of Acre. The initial shock of the Crusader peasant pikemen and axemen caught Saladin's men off guard, who seemed to have been slightly out of formation. But this was a trap. As the pikemen pushed forward, Saladin's brother Al-Adil lured the poorly trained Christian footmen into his camp. There, the attack gradually devolved into plundering and looting of the Muslim tents. Saladin then sent Egyptian and Mosul reinforcements to trap the enemy in the camp. Worse, the Christian attack was poorly coordinated, with only a few dozen knights joining the charge, led by Ralph de Hauterive, Archdeacon of Colchester. Now the attacking contingent was at serious risk of being wiped out. But Ralph and his armored retinue of knights managed to carve a path through the Muslim lines to escape. But the damage to the Crusader ranks was terrible, as up to 9,000 fell in this failed attack, including Ralph himself.
Holy crap, bro, the Crusaders. Man, the momentum is definitely shifting to the Muslims. Saladin definitely is the ball in is in his court at the moment, because the Crusaders keep, like, kind of ruining it for themselves.
3 days later, on July 28th, 10,000 Crusader reinforcements arrived in camp under Henry of Champagne. Henry's contingent was the vanguard of a massive Frankish army en route to the Holy Land under King Philippe II of France. By the fall of 1190, the English contingent headed by Baldwin, Archbishop of Canterbury, landed and informed the besiegers that King Richard I of England had embarked for the Holy Land.
Oh, dude, I'm hyped once Richard gets here. Like, that's kind of what I'm mainly waiting for right now.
However, it would be some time before either Philippe or Richard arrived at Acre. Then news reached Saladin that Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa had died on June 10th while crossing a shallow river near Armenia. Although leadership passed on to his son Frederick of Swabia, the German contingent of the Crusader army fell apart. Many German nobles returned to Europe, and a few that remained under the Duke of Swabia suffered from famine and became bogged down battling Muslim, Seljuk, and Kurdish tribesmen. Only 5,000...
Yeah, we covered in the Second Crusade. Any Crusader army that goes through Anatolia is usually attacked by the Sultanate of Rome, and the Sultanate of Rome destroyed many Christian armies trying to get to the Holy Land. So it does not surprise me that the German contingent was no doubt harassed and probably suffered casualties from the Seljuks. Yeah, what a... That's why at this point, like, going through sea is probably the safer option. Crossing into Anatolia is basically, like, you're gonna come out with losses. Oh boy.
1,000 survivors reached Tripoli, finally moving... Only 5,000 survivors...
Only 5,000? That's insane. I didn't know if the over 200,000 number is good or inflated, but like, if it's anywhere near that, that's awful. Holy crap.
Reached Tripoli, finally moving to join the siege against Acre in October. Back at Acre for several weeks, Henry of Champagne attempted numerous assaults on the city, using battering rams and scaling ladders. But Crusader fortunes worsened as Muslim sallies from Acre's gates destroyed Henry's siege engines in early September. In the harbour, the Christian fleet launched an attack of their own. Attempting to destroy the Muslim harbour defence, on September 24th they sent explosive ramming vessels against the Tower of Flies. But just as the vessels were about to collide with the tower, the winds abruptly shifted and the ships began colliding with each other.
Oh no.
Amidst the chaos, a few small Muslim raiding ships launched a sortie of their own. With thick black smoke engulfing the harbour, they passed virtually unnoticed, their sights set on the heavily fortified and specially built Pisan ship, which they proceeded to set ablaze unopposed. Once the Christians realized what was happening, the Muslim sortie already turned and made their way back.
Dude, this is literally, this entire event is you guys remember those cartoons, Spy versus Spy, where they just keep going back and forth? You know what I mean? This is literally just live action spy versus spy with all these back and forths, but mainly the Muslims so far gaining the upper hand while the Christians are floundering. Wow.
Christian naval supremacy over Acre once again ended with the early onset of cold weather. Throughout the winter of 1190 to 91, plague and famine beset the Crusader camp. Intestinal fever took thousands of troops, desperately huddled together in the frigid cold outside the walls of Acre. Henry of Champagne was afflicted, barely clinging on to life. Frederick of Swabia became sick with malaria and died on January 20th, 1191.
Dude, the German contingent was so, like, screwed over this series. All that hype and they just fell apart, and their leaders, holy crap.
Food supplies diminished rapidly by early spring, with common soldiers getting by on scraps of grass or chewing bare bones. Crowds gathered to fight over scraps of dead horses, with even the beasts' entrails being eaten by the famished troops.
Oh my gosh. Why didn't you idiots take the offer? I'm sorry, I'm gonna be on that all day. They had 2 chances to end all this quickly, and they just did not take them. Yeah, very, very glorious, guys. I'm sorry, every time we watch the Crusades, I'm always so frustrated by the Christians, because they really, at times, kind of screw themselves over a lot, or make things harder for themselves than it needs to be. That's like a running trend with the Crusades, starting from the first all the way onward. You know what I mean? It's like, man, a lot of the Crusades is just the Christians making things way more difficult for themselves at times than it needs to be overall, but oh my gosh.
Relief finally came to the Crusaders on April 20th, 1191, when King Philippe of France landed with vital supplies of grain and corn, as well as fresh soldiers and siege engines. King Richard of England was on his way to Tyre 7 weeks later, on June 8th, bringing 25 ships with him, fresh from his conquest of the Kingdom of Cyprus. On approach, he briefly engaged a Muslim fleet sallying out of the harbour to intercept the incoming English reinforcements, but nevertheless got through. Philippe, 8 years older than Richard, wanted to lead the army based on his leadership experience.
If I'm remembering from the Third Crusade series, Richard and Philip had quite the power struggle. Eventually, I think Philip just leaves, which gives Richard basically the full control of the Christian side. But yeah, these guys were at each other's throats for a bit.
In France against the English. He preferred to continue a slow, intricate siege against Acre until it finally capitulated. The Crusader leadership, however, deferred to Richard, nicknamed the Lion-Hearted, who was reputed to be a fierce fighter, famed for leading his men in close hand-to-hand battles. Richard identified his target straight away, the Cursed Tower. He had one trebuchet, nicknamed Bad Neighbor, and
I remember Bad Neighbor, like, his siege equipment had, like, the weirdest, wackest names ever. I love that. Bad Neighbor. You're about to feel the wrath of Bad Neighbor, bro.
Heavy catapult owned by the Knights Hospitallers, known as the Stone Thrower.
I love that. He named these himself. He's like, this is a Stone Thrower, a Bad Neighbor. That's cool.
For the Cursed Tower at the northeast corner of Acre's walls. The rest of the artillery were ordered to strike elsewhere. Bombardment began on June 14th. The Templars focused on the eastern walls, while the Duke of Burgundy's catapults fired at the northern coastal fortifications. In time, Richard's own siege artillery joined in the endless bombardment, but both he and King Philippe were sick and bedridden. Crusader war machines lobbed stones past the walls into the city market. Hits from the Hospitaller artillery finally demolished a 30-square-foot section of the wall adjacent to the Cursed Tower. Late June consisted of light skirmishing outside the city. Saladin's advance guard probed the Crusader rear defenses as the Christians continued pummeling Acre with stones. Muslim hopes for relieving the siege faded, even as Saladin received needed reinforcements in his camp. Matters only worsened for the Muslim defenders as the Christians began launching assaults on the walls starting on July 2nd. Richard organized round-the-clock attacks. Wave after wave of infantry, archers, and artillery attempted to breach the city's crumbling fortifications.
Notice the complete tonal shift once Richard arrived, right? Like, the Christians were kind of floundering, but now it seems like the momentum has once again shifted, for once more in line in their favor. Again, like, that's often what I've heard, like, Richard really helped get the Christian side moving. So yeah, definitely he MVP of this series.
Attempts to scale the walls failed. The grueling operation came at an ever-increasing cost to men and material, but Richard was determined. Meanwhile, Philip's sappers tunneled their way towards the walls. Their aim was to reach the Cursed Tower. The artillery bombardment collapsed parts of the tower, which opened a gaping hole in the fortifications. Richard's focused fire finally paying off. Committing any able-bodied man who could bear arms to the breach, the Muslim defenders were barely able to fend off the attacking Crusaders. Saladin launched his own attacks to relieve the defenders in Acre. But despite fierce and prolonged fighting, his troops were unable to break through the ring of besiegers. Swimmers carried messages from the city to the gathered emirs, pleading for help. A final appeal was sent out on July 7th. On July 11th, Philippe's sappers dug beneath the partially collapsed Cursed Tower and successfully demolished the rest, further widening the gap in the walls. By this point, Acre's defenders were too weak to man the breach. In desperation, they used Greek fire, killing 40 Crusaders on July 11th. Those were the last Christian casualties of the siege. With the night fast approaching, no one yet knew that the siege of Acre was over. As the sun rose over Acre on July 12, 1191, the siege entered its 653rd day.
Oh my gosh.
One of the longest sieges of the Middle Ages at last drew to a close as the city's defenders, against Saladin's wishes, surrendered to the Crusaders.
Wow. Again, Richard, he gets the MVP award. He's already proven to be the most competent of the Christian side just by this, in the few minutes he just showed up, right? Oh my gosh. 600 days? That's insane. I mean, we've seen a lot of long sieges, but still, holy crap, bro.
Around 19,000 Christian troops had been killed during the terrible siege, with the city's garrison losing anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000 men, and the relief army under Saladin also suffering terribly. The final savage act of the siege took place after Acre's capitulation. Richard the Lionheart ordered the execution of 2,700 survivors of the Acre garrison, probably because Saladin had refused to pay 200,400 gold pieces for their ransom and declined to return the piece of the True Cross taken at Hattin. By the end of the siege, the rift between the Crusader leadership had widened. King Philip of France and Leopold of Austria angrily returned to their homelands in Europe, taking their contingents with them. Richard took the exhausted yet victorious Crusader army further into the Holy Land to continue his campaign against Saladin, setting his sights on retaking Jerusalem.
Yeah, Richard, bro. Actually, probably for the best that they left and just let Richard take control because, again, Richard the Lionheart was very competent in what he did, you know?
The siege of Acre was but the first bloody chapter of the Third Crusade. The Crusader victory at the siege of Acre in July 1191 paved a way for their march on the city of Jerusalem. While King Richard the Lionheart planned his next move, the Crusaders rested in the conquered city of Acre, which was divided into military quarters administered by the Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, and Knights Teutonic. Meanwhile, on August 20th, the captive Muslim prisoners of the city garrison were all put to the sword on Richard's orders. Eager to follow up the success at Acre with an advance on Jerusalem, the English king led his forces on a long march towards the Holy City in late August, aiming to first capture the important port of Jaffa on the Mediterranean coast. Shadowing Richard's knights was Saladin's Ayyubid army, over 25,000 strong. With Acre lost and the Crusaders having established a firm foothold in the Middle Levant, Saladin's mission now was to ensure that Richard did not reach Jerusalem, lest the city fall back into Christian hands. The Crusaders' route of march presented Saladin with an opportunity, one he was quick to seize. While the Crusaders marched down the coastal road to Jaffa, Saladin would use his own numerical superiority over the smaller Christian army to ambush them on the plains north of the ruined castle of Arsuf. On the hot, humid afternoon of September 7th, 1191, the armies under two of the greatest generals of the medieval era, Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, would clash at the Battle of Arsuf. Hanging in the balance of this epic engagement was the fate of the Third Crusade.
Hype.
With Acre now firmly under Christian rule, the Crusaders had a base from which to launch operations deeper into the Levant. King Richard was meticulous in his planning for the summer offensive, plotting out the route the Crusaders would take on their march into Lower Palestine towards Jerusalem. There were two possible routes the Crusaders could use, both of which had advantages and drawbacks. First, there was the inland route, taking the army from Acre to Nazareth and then on to Jerusalem. This would take them on a march through rugged, broken terrain where the roads ran through several valleys, which Saladin could use as choke points to cut off and ambush the Crusaders.
So definitely beyond risky, right? Especially since Saladin is pretty good at sneak attack, so yeah, very dangerous.
Furthermore, Nazareth was a good 20 miles from Acre, meaning the Crusaders would have to stretch a thin line of communications to link their army back to the supply base at Acre. This would provide Saladin with an opportunity to disrupt Richard's supply lines and defeat his army piecemeal. The second route called for seizing key ports in the Lower Palestine region, namely the city of Jaffa. By using the coastal roads, the terrain would protect the mounted Crusader knights and their long baggage train. After taking Jaffa, the Crusaders would drive on to the much larger port of Ascalon, another 30 miles to the south. Richard could then use these ports as springboards for a subsequent push on Jerusalem itself. The anchorages would also permit direct supply lines for the Crusaders for their eventual siege of Jerusalem. Finally, after much careful deliberation, Richard decided to go with the second route. On August 20...
Yeah, honestly, the second route sounds much better, and way better at, like, negating any sneak attacks or Saladin disrupting communication, so Richard was beyond smart to go with the second one. And, you know, again, naval superiority has been kind of the saving grace for the Crusaders this series, as we've seen, being able to rally reinforcements and supplies from the sea. So having more coastal ports under their control would no doubt be even more invaluable to the Crusaders. So again, yeah, Richard definitely went with the safer and probably the smarter, well, not probably, but I think personally, the smarter option, which will no doubt be of much bigger benefit.
5th, the Crusaders set out from Acre onto the sandy plain of Haifa, bringing for the campaign 1,200 knights and 10,000 men-at-arms and footmen. The Crusaders brought along their own rations of water and food, as Saladin was likely to poison the wells and conduct a scorched earth policy during the Christian march. To supply the troops on their 130-kilometer trek, a Crusader fleet sailed southward 3 days earlier, keeping pace with the army. This way, Richard could ferry troops and supplies from the fleet to the army along the coastal road.
Again, smart. Richard, I remember from the Extra History Saladin series, it's like Saladin met his worst enemy because Richard, unlike the other Crusaders, knew what he was doing. He was actually competent. Oh, he made that joke, and I laugh at it. But it's true, though. Richard definitely proving his competence. Like, the dude's thinking on all fronts, preparing for every eventuality, right? He's like, okay, we can't go with the first option because the sneak attacks, the threat to my communication. So he's going through here, and he's like, okay, let me bring the ships so I can keep supplies. Like, this is, he's thinking of all the fronts that Saladin could challenge him on, and is working to negate all of them. Again, it's like, you would think like, duh, but like, we've seen a lot of incompetence on the Christian side throughout the Crusader era, so Richard, by comparison, is just leagues above, and it goes to show why. That the man's actually thinking.
The blistering summer heat during the day meant that the Crusaders had to move during the morning hours and set up camp during the afternoon. All the while, Saladin's army lurked in the shadows of the easterly hills, watching the slow progress of the Crusaders and waiting for the opportune moment to strike.
Like vultures.
Saladin would send raiding parties of about 20 to 30 men down the hills to attack the Crusaders at key points on the march, constantly harassing Richard's troops and keeping them on edge. Many stragglers in the rear guard were picked off and cut down, as well as 400 horses, which were irreplaceable on the march. For a brief time, the Crusader rear guard lost contact with the rest of the column, and it might have been entirely cut off and annihilated if only Saladin's son, Melek el-Afdal, had more men at his disposal. By the time Saladin received el-Afdal's message, it was too late, and the Christians in the rear had managed to rejoin the main body.
Whew, that was a close one.
The Crusaders' movement around the spur of Mount Carmel was an arduous affair, slow in nature due to the difficulty of maintaining contact with the naval forces off the coast, coupled with continued harassment by Muslim raiders. Yet Richard continued to maintain his patience, methodically moving his men in the cool early morning and resting them in the hot afternoon. Finally, the Crusader army marched past Haifa, then around Mount Carmel, before halting at an area known as the Casal of the Narrow Ways. From here, the Christians entered unfamiliar territory as they moved into the plain of Sharon, a marshland covered in dense vegetation. Muslim scouts continued watching the Crusaders from the hills during their southward movement to Caesarea. Meanwhile, the bulk of Saladin's army encamped at Tel Qayanun. Despite suffering from severe blisters on his lower body, the Sultan endured the pain to move between his scouting posts and the main camp, keeping tabs on Crusader movements. When the Christians reached the outskirts of Caesarea, Saladin opted not to attack, guided by patience and his desire to wait for the best moment to attack.
Yeah, they're both of kind of the same mind in a sense that there's that war that keeps coming up, patience and being methodical. And Saladin definitely is patient and he is methodical in the way he conducts things. He's never rash, I feel. Never wanting to go into an engagement unless he feels like he has a very solid chance of success, you know? And Richard also is very methodical and patient compared to many other Crusader leaders we've seen, of course. So again, like you can kind of see that both of them are kind of like similar in some senses like that.
He was cautious, not wishing to commit his entire army to the field until reinforcements had arrived from his emirs throughout the Sultanate. Saladin remained indecisive for a few days as the Crusaders marched into the empty ghost town that was Caesarea, before moving on to a stream 3 miles south, called the River of the Dead.
Oh my gosh.
Skirmishing grew fiercer after leaving Caesarea, and King Richard moved into the middle guard to oversee the defense of the formation. Richard briefly halted his army to rest for 3 days, beginning on September 3rd. All the while the Crusader fleet kept the men supplied. Meanwhile, Saladin's army entered the forest of Arsuf, a large woodland stretching 12 miles north of the ruined fortress town of Arsuf. Arsuf had been destroyed by Saladin during his conquests in 1187, and the broken citadel remained standing, serving as a stark reminder of the Sultan's campaign 4 years earlier. While the Crusaders rested in their camp tents, Saladin spent the daylight hours of September 3rd to 4th personally reconnoitering their position, searching for a suitable place to launch a full-scale surprise attack. The forest of Arsuf masked the Ayyubid presence while keeping them at striking distance from the Christian army. It was here, at Arsuf, that Saladin finally sensed the opportunity he had been waiting for. On the morning of September 5th, the Crusaders packed their tents and moved out once more, stopping for the afternoon at Wadi al-Falik, not too far from the ruins of Arsuf. Richard had his men pitch tents in a plain situated between the shoreline and a vast marsh which shielded the camp from a surprise attack.
Oh, I see.
During the afternoon, Richard sent an envoy,
Which makes sense of why Saladin would feel this is a great time to strike with that element of surprise advantage he could see.
to Saladin's brother, Al-Adil Saif ad-Din, commonly known to the Crusaders as Safaddin, asking to negotiate possible peace terms. Saladin, upon learning of this, ordered his brother to stall the talks while reinforcements continued pouring into the Muslim camp, hoping to buy time for his army to build up its strength. The next day, Safaddin met with King Richard and his envoys. During the talks, Richard demanded that the Muslims cede all their conquered lands of Jerusalem back to Guy, which Safaddin was outraged and indignant over.
Yeah, that's pretty ballsy from Richard to be like, give everything back. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know that Saladin's brothers kind of meant to stall this for sure, but like, surely Richard would realize that that's like an offer that no one would accept, right? Especially also in strength. So I'm wondering if like Richard really like intended or even thought there's a possibility of them ever saying yes to such big demands, you know? But I do like the correspondence between Richard and Saladin, especially later on when they become way more cordial. I think there's like an event where Saladin like sent Richard, who was sick at a time, like fruit or like physicians. So, stuff like that. I also think like Richard even like proposed on marrying like what of Saladin's like family or something like that. There was even like a marriage proposal straight up abroad. So again, Richard's very bold though. You kind of get that impression. He does live up to the nickname of the Lionheart because he is bold and audacious, like a lion, you know. And yeah, this is a very interesting demand and encounter between the two.
Before anything could be made of the parley, Saladin broke off the talks against the wishes of his brother. Nevertheless, Saladin managed to arrange his army on the plains south of the forest of Arsuf. The Muslim army totaled 25,000. For several days, King Richard had been anticipating a possible attack by Saladin. Thus, on the march for September 7th, 1191, he rearranged his columns into 5 battle divisions. The Templars under Grand Master Robert de Sable kept up the vanguard, joined by a contingent of Turcopoles, native cavalrymen who were lightly armed, fast-moving, and trained to counter Muslim raiders. Behind a vanguard of Templars and Turcopoles were the Angevins, soldiers from Aquitaine, along with a contingent of Bretons and soldiers from Poitou. These 2 divisions were under the command of King Guy. The 4th division was made up of the English and Normans. Lastly, the Knights Hospitallers and French brought up the rear in the 5th division, overseen by Hospitaller Grand Master Garnier de Nablus. Richard and the Duke of Burgundy rode along the full length of the march, urging the men to maintain compact ranks. Saladin watched the Crusaders march by, allowing them to move several miles down the road before he unleashed his offensive. Richard's scouts alerted him that Saladin's army was possibly preparing for an assault. Suddenly, Bedouin and Nubian skirmishers emerged and attacked the formation around mid-morning. To the sound of blazing trumpets and beating kettle drums, the Muslim army rushed across the plain to engage the Crusaders. The Battle of Arsuf had begun.
Something I've always liked about the Crusades is definitely the culture clash. Like, you have European technology, tactics, weaponry, and advancement versus, like, the Middle Eastern, you know, tactics, weaponry, and whatnot. And it's really a clash of cultures, East and West. And that's something I've always liked, because it's, like, not only an like, religious thing, like, you know, with Christian and, you know, Islam, but like also just like cultural. That's something I've always liked about these things, and you're just kind of seeing like the 2 sides kind of going at it. That's something I've always admired about the Crusades, and always really love learning about the battles and just seeing how they differ between these 2 parts of the world, you know?
Crusader knights and infantry braced themselves for the heavy charge. Egyptian cavalry from Saladin's division swooped down from the north and attacked the French in the rear guard. Al-Afdal's Syrian cavalry simultaneously pounded the French line from the east. The Knights Hospitallers and their infantry support now suddenly found themselves being assailed on 2 sides. The press of the Muslim attack soon became unbearable for the Hospitallers and French. Muslim squadrons from the left division simultaneously attacked the Crusaders' middle guard in an effort to pin down the enemy and keep them from reinforcing the French and Hospitallers. Saladin meanwhile moved up his household Mamluk Guard division into position behind Al-Afdal's men. The Mamluk heavy shock cavalry would now be in place to exploit gaps carved through the Crusader line in order to engage Richard's armored knights.
Oh my goodness. You know, I play Total War Rome too, and I mainly use melee cavalry because there's 2 types of cavalry. Well, several actually, but I guess of the more physical martial one, there's melee cavalry, and then there's shock cavalry. And earlier on when I was playing, I didn't really use... I tried using the shock cavalry, but I didn't understand, like, when I was first playing the game, because like, this is, like, my first Total War game. So, like, I would have, like, the Thessalian cavalry, from Greece, and then I would like charge them while I go on and focus on like my infantry, and like they would get destroyed really quick. I was like, why is every battle I fight my cavalry constantly being wiped out quickly? And then I realized the difference between the two. Shock cavalry is meant to like, you're meant to charge. The charge is the real damage. You charge, hit the enemy, stay there for not too long, and then pull out quickly and do repeated charges cycles. Unlike melee cavalry, which you can charge and just like leave them to fight in prolonged battles where they would do much better and even excel at. So I kind of stopped using shock cavalry because I kind of didn't want to micromanage cavalry at times when I could focus on other parts of my battle. But yeah, recently I've kind of started using shock cavalry more because I do kind of like the charge and the cycle. While they do get destroyed quicker, under conditions, I do kind of appreciate that charge effect. So I usually have been implementing them more. And yeah, the whole point is to destroy them. I've like been trying to use cataphracts more and like other shock stuff. So I don't know. It's something I really like, and it's something I'm kind of starting to realize the difference or what they mean by shock cavalry versus other types. I don't know. It's really cool.
Footmen in the Crusader rear guard ferociously fought tooth and nail to hold back the mounted Turkic archers. Crusader crossbowmen shot down many of these.
Yeah, and with the shock cavalry took in mind, using them when enemies are engaged or weak is always the best. And I see what Saladin's going for, right? Like weaken them, hopefully create a gap, and then the shock cavalry just comes in and delivers that breaking hit, you know? So I like that plan he's coming up with there.
Light cavalry troops, but they were soon replaced by fresh horse archers so that the French could not withstand the assault. Many of Saladin's horse archers opted to dismount in order to rapidly fire off more arrows from their light bows. As the battle dragged on, the Muslim bowmen succeeded in killing many of the Hospitallers' mounts, greatly frustrating the knights. Master Garnier de Nablu sent word to King Richard that their lines could not be hemmed in any further. He insisted to the king that the Hospitallers should launch a charge to break out of their ensnarement. But Richard would not relent to the request. He was all too aware that if the Hospitaller knights broke formation, it would spell disaster for the whole army.
Agreed. It's like when we covered the First Crusade series, one of the earlier engagements that the Crusaders had with the Turks is that they were surrounded at one point, and harassed relentlessly by the Turkish horse archers, and the whole point of that battle was don't break. If we break and run around, we're gonna be separated, isolated, cut down. So discipline was the point, and that's been an undoing of many of the Crusader armies up to this point. The lack of discipline, their ability to like break off, try to charge, and then like get isolated, get lured. So Richard, again, a step way above his peers, you know, recognizes this and is like, no, we hold, we don't fall for the trap. And again, trying to pursue horse archers and stuff is not great. When I'm playing like Total War, it's horse archery is OP. When I was at war with Parthia, like I mainly use like Greek phalanxes and melee cavalry. When I went to war with Parthia at one point as the Seleucid Empire, and I've never suffered as many casualties in my life as I had battling Parthia, because as I was going eastward to try conquer the east, the whole east, I kid you not, was conquered by Parthia. Meanwhile, I had a good amount of like, you know, like only like the center around like the Arabian Peninsula. So I'm trying to go, but like the Parthians just had these huge armies of like horse archers and skirmishers and long-range people, and obviously I had to adapt because like the battles I was fighting, at one point one of my armies was completely destroyed by their horse archers because I'm struggling trying to catch them with my melee and heavy cavalry, and I can't catch them because they're horse archers. I had to adapt. I had to start hiring horse archer mercenaries. I had to start replacing a lot of my phalanx units with more skirmishers, bowmen. Like, I had to adapt. It's like, it's easy to get lured and harassed and really fall apart with these kinds of units. So, like, the whole discipline and whatnot. So, overall, yeah, again, Richard is a genius for recognizing that. And a lot of this, what I'm saying, like, what makes Richard so smart, sounds a lot like common sense to us. Like, like, hey, don't be lured into traps, maintain discipline, make sure your supply lines are great. And again, a lot of this, I'm saying he's genius for this, and a lot of it to us sounds like, yeah, that's like common sense. But again, as we've been through many of the Crusader series, apparently a lot of Crusaders did not have that because they fell for all these tricks and did not follow all these very basic sounding procedures, which makes Richard stand out even more.
Despite coming under increased pressure, the Crusader line continued inching its way south. Richard sensed the frustration of the Muslim ranks at their inability to break through the Crusader lines.
Their stone wall.
Garnier soon grew angry with Richard's refusal to permit a charge. He shouted over the din of battle to the king, again requesting permission for a charge. Once again, Richard urged patience. Still highly
Again, that word that keeps popping up this series, patience. Richard has patience, unlike a lot of other people, and Saladin also has patience. That's what makes them great rivals. They have that in common, and they can both go back and forth, being methodical, being patient. That's the word that, I feel like that's the word that keeps popping up this video, and it's very, very, it really, I think, captures both men.
agitated, he returned to the rear guard to find his Hospitallers under even greater stress than before, and his knights on the verge of mutiny. "Why do we not charge them at full gallop?" they shouted at Master Garnier, to which he had no response. The Muslims continued pressing the advantage against the rear guard. The Christian foot soldiers grew exhausted from the relentless attacks. Gaps were opening in their ranks as the casualties rose, and the mounted Hospitallers behind them were coming under a hail of arrow fire as well. Around this time, Saladin began making his presence felt on the battlefield, and his men fought with even greater ferocity and determination as the Sultan rode back and forth between the lines, shouting words of encouragement. Just as some of the Egyptian cavalry began turning the left flank of the French and Hospitaller line and got into the rear of Richard's army, Crusader infantry rushed up along the shore to block their effort.
They went for the flank, the oldest trick in the book, but it was not successful. Intercepted.
Master Garnier again requested permission to launch a...
Garnier! What was it? I don't know, but like, Garnier just keeps popping up, please, just let us fight, and Richard's just like, bro. Bro, let me... You know what the saying is nowadays, as the kids say? Let him cook. That's the saying. You gotta let Richard cook. He knows what he's doing.
Charge from Richard, but once more the English king refused him. Richard informed the Hospitaller Grand Master that he would signal a concerted charge by all the lines at the right moment, and not before then. Richard sent word to his officers that the signal for an all-out charge would be given by the blaring of 6 trumpet blasts. If the Hospitallers charged out on their own, it would disrupt the line and cause chaos. Worse, charging too soon would give the Muslims the chance to wheel about and counterattack. The moment had to be precise.
Again, that moment, that that methodical thinking. He's like, we need to time this correctly. And him and Saladin have that in common. Saladin's always thinking of the right moment to strike. He's patient, he waits, and then when he sees that opportunity, he goes for it. Richard, I keep trying to, they have so many parallels between them. Richard's the same. He's like, man, it's like watching two very even chess players, going at it.
And Richard knew this well. If timed right, the Muslim cavalry would be unable to withstand the charge of the heavy knights mounted atop their armored steeds. As the Battle of Arsuf dragged on throughout the morning, Master Garnier struggled to maintain the cohesion of his impatient Hospitallers. They were angered at the loss of many of their horses and were eager for payback. Then, without orders, two mounted knights broke rank and charged. One was Hospitaller Marshal, the other was Baldwin Le Caron, a knight in Richard's household retinue who had joined the fight in the rear guard. It is likely they mistook two blasts from a Muslim trumpet as the signal for the start of the Christian counterattack. This, or they simply charged on their own accord. On seeing his marshal ride out of formation, Master Garnier gave the order for his Hospitaller knights to charge the Muslims, with some of the nearby French knights joining the attack.
Oh my gosh.
Upon seeing the Hospitallers break formation, Richard realized it was now or never, and gave the order for the rest of the army to join the attack, save for his Anglo-Norman troopers, who remained in place guarding the Crusader standard. Richard and his household cavalry smashed into the Ayyubid ranks with their lances and swords, as Richard personally fought in the midst of the action. Meanwhile, the Crusader vanguard led by King Guy had reached a series of orchards in the northern outskirts of Arsuf. Far away from the combat in the rear, the Templars and the vanguard under Grand Master Robert de Sable stood by, waiting for orders. It seemed to the Muslim leadership as though the Crusaders had launched a well-coordinated attack. Saladin committed his Mamluk household guard, attempting to keep the Crusaders from destroying his now disorganized army. The heavily armored Mamluk cavalry were the only troops in Saladin's army who could stand against the mounted Christian knights, who were busy scattering the Muslim infantry. Richard ordered his knights to halt after they moved close to the wooded hills beyond the coastal plain, fearing that they would overextend themselves, fighting into the ravines and hills ahead, and become ambushed and destroyed. Elsewhere, Saladin gathered his officers and with a small company of bodyguards rode to redeploy on a tall hill near the edge of the forest. His company's drummers beat the signal for his men to rally around, while the Crusader knights reformed once more and charged with their infantry to clear the battlefield of Muslim stragglers and ensure the defeat of the enemy. The battle was over. It had ended in victory for Richard the Lionheart and his Crusaders.
Yeah, it's a good thing it worked out there at the end, because the Templars went AWOL there for a second, but it worked out though. Richard quickly just capitalizing and joining in, but man, that could have went bad, but luckily it went well, for them. Yeah, that battle, bro, that was awesome.
The Crusader heavy cavalry charges had successfully broken through the Muslim lines, but Saladin was able to reform his army and withdraw to the safety of the forest of Arsuf. Richard's knights and footmen, exhausted from the morning-long battle, were now free to move on to Arsuf. The Battle of Arsuf had proven that Richard could defeat Saladin in a pitched battle. However, the fact that Saladin's army remained intact meant that the Christian victory was not complete. The Crusader cavalry losses were minor, but the foot infantry had suffered around 700 casualties in the battle. It is estimated that the Muslims lost around 7,000 men during the battle.
Dang.
In the end, Richard's tactical victory at Arsuf was void of strategic results, as he resumed his march on Jaffa, and Saladin's army limped away from Arsuf, beaten but still intact.
Yeah, Saladin always has a great way of being beaten but never broken. Like, he always lives to fight another day.
The Crusaders proceeded to capture that strategic port city later in the month. With the campaigning season of 1191 soon coming to a close, however, it seemed as though the drive on Jerusalem would have to wait until the next year. During the fall and winter of 1191 to 92, the opening of possible peace talks or a truce between Richard and Saladin would mark the beginning of the end of the Third Crusade. Nevertheless, Arsuf played a key role in damaging Saladin's reputation gained at Hattin 4 years earlier, and helped cement the legacy of Richard the Lionheart as one of the great generals of the medieval era.
Okay, so I was just reading the footnotes real quick. Alright, so overall that battle was important because it solidified Richard's leadership and showing that he can be the head commander. And on the other hand, Saladin's reputation definitely took a huge blow. Alright, really interesting.
It is midsummer 1192. Almost a year has passed since Richard the Lionheart's crusading army defeated the Muslim forces under Saladin at Arsuf and seized the important coastal town of Jaffa. The passing months have witnessed 2 separate advances on Jerusalem. However, both operations have stalled due to inadequate numbers, insecure supply lines, and the emergence of bitter rivalries within the Christian camp. Although Richard's tactical successes have effectively hamstrung Saladin's ability to take the initiative, the Lionheart cannot overcome the latent geographical and strategic advantages held by his Muslim foe. With ever more reliable evidence that King Philippe Augustus of France and his brother John are plotting to take his Angevin holdings, Richard is convinced it is time for him to return home. He concentrates his forces at Acre and awaits favorable winds to take him west, confident of his enemy's supineness. Little does he suspect that Saladin, desperate to regain lost prestige, has gathered his emirs for one final offensive, hoping to land a decisive blow that will drive these foreign warriors from the Levant forever. The Crusaders' twin victories at Acre and
both seem to be in dire straits to some degree. Saladin needs to keep everyone, the Muslims, on his side, right? Because I kind of mentioned earlier that he was keeping all them together, but that, that was a big struggle in a lot of his career, keeping all, the Muslim world kind of united under him, and that's kind of hard to do, and something he struggled with. So taking repeated failures and losses will encourage much more people to question his overall leadership. And on the other hand, you have Richard, who's having issues hearing problems at home, and it's like, I might need to get home real quick, because my lame brother John and Philip might just cause trouble. So yeah, they both kind of seem like they're kind of like really desperate at points, and they're both sort of reaching dire straits and both need something big, right, to happen.
Arsuf in 1191 had put Saladin firmly on the defensive. The former conflict had resulted in the considerable loss of material, elite troops, and the entirety of his Egyptian fleet. Although Muslims had suffered fewer casualties at Arsuf, Saladin's inability to stop Richard's southward march towards Jaffa had caused him to lose face among his emirs. To make matters worse, the Sultan fell seriously ill, depriving him of the trademark charisma which had helped keep his army together. For his part, Richard was becoming ever more aware of the deep-rooted factionalism within the Crusader states and his army, an environment that seriously threatened the integrity of his own multinational force and his mission. He soon realized that only sustained offensive operations would keep this turmoil at bay. Yet this...
Dang. Yeah, he's kind of in the same camp as Saladin in that regard, that they're both trying to keep their sides together and their armies because of, like, divisions and stuff. Oh boy.
Was a risky strategy. Richard could ill afford to suffer any setback given the outnumbered position of the Crusaders in the Levant. Moreover, any movement would either require extensive logistical support from a region ill-suited to supply it, or be supplied from abroad at potentially prohibitive costs. All the while, disunity among the Crusader states would further complicate the supply chain. Unsurprisingly, both leaders started looking for a quick, decisive campaign that would deal a knockout punch and force the other.
Again, yeah, they're both in the exact same position. They both need a big, decisive finish. Oh boy, that's like prime for a big, all-out conflict, right?
To a negotiated settlement. Richard was quick to seize the initiative. Jaffa fell without a struggle on September 10th, a mere 3 days after the Battle of Arsuf, and immediately began reconstructing the town walls and dry moat. Securing this vital port, the closest to Jerusalem, presented Richard with 2 alternatives: to continue down the coast towards Ascalon and Derham, threatening Saladin's strategic base in Egypt, or to push inland towards the Holy City itself. Unable to defend against both options, Saladin raised Ascalon's defenses and expelled its inhabitants, leaving only a covering force under one of his sons, Al-Afdal, in the vicinity. With dissident emirs and their levies departing every day, the Sultan was forced to retain a mere handful of defenders at Derham and other fortified positions in the south, and concentrated his personal retinue at Jerusalem. In blocking the land routes to Egypt, Saladin correctly understood Richard's intentions. By October 1191, the English king concluded that an Egyptian campaign would exert the most pressure on Saladin. As a vast source of wealth.
If I remember correctly from the Saladin series by Extra History, there were the 2 options, right? Go to Ascalon and onward, or go to Jerusalem. But I think he got a lot of pushback, right? From the other Crusaders for not taking the Holy Land itself, right? And like, not taking Jerusalem, how could you ignore Jerusalem? Even though, like, strategically, taking Ascalon and going on here would be much more sound and probably put Saladin in a much worse position. I think there's a lot of pushback on this idea because everyone, you know, Jerusalem's kind of the main prize, you feel me? So kind of leaving Richard a bit stumped there.
And highly trained troops, Egypt was the backbone of Saladin's war effort.
Yeah, and he would be smart to go onward there and put as much pressure as possible on Saladin, but I'm pretty sure that does not happen.
Thus, Richard began contracting with Pisan and Genoese captains to assemble a fleet at Acre. Neither group, however, was willing to risk their ships this close to the end of the sailing season. Worse, the powerful French faction in Richard's army under Hugh of Burgundy saw Egypt as an irrelevant objective and refused to join the campaign. Their
Yep.
sole aim was Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, Robert de Sablé, Grand Master of the Templars, and Garnier de Naples, Grand Master of the Hospitallers, urged Richard to quickly decide on the next course of action and press the advantage gained at Acre and Arsuf. But Richard, against his better judgment, delayed the offensive on Egypt until the following summer. And to pacify the French and keep his army intact, he decided to march inland towards Jerusalem. Crusader morale stayed at a high level into the fall, yet the king moved with some misgivings. Rumors had reached him that Philippe Augustus, his one-time fellow crusader, had begun plotting to conquer his Angevin domains back home.
Mm-hmm.
It was at this point that the English king opened negotiations with Saladin. The Sultan, his forces considerably reduced and demoralized, was eager to listen and to extend counter-proposals, although no agreement was reached.
Mm-hmm.
The Crusaders' progress was steady, and the town of Ramla, 20 kilometers from Jaffa, fell on November 17th. Over the next month, however, daily skirmishes became more intense. Few casualties resulted from these attacks, but they exhausted the Crusader force, and the advance slowed to a crawl. Increasingly cold and rainy weather did not help the mood either. By Christmas 1191, Richard's forces were not even halfway towards Jerusalem. With internal tensions rising to a peak, Richard stopped at Beit Nuba and held a council of war. The Grand Masters of both orders urged Richard to consider the vulnerability of his position and withdraw, while the French faction again demanded a further advance on Jerusalem.
It's always the French that are always the most, like, pushy towards a thing. Every crusade, bro, it's, like, always the French, like, no, we need to do this, or else, you know? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I do not envy Richard's position. He has to, like, basically keep... Again, him and Saladin have so much alike. They're both kind of in the same situation in different ways, you know? Having to keep everyone together... Well, meanwhiling, like, you know, just... I don't envy this, bro. Like, what a headache this would be. Also, he's having to worry about what the heck's going on at home, so he's like, let's settle this quickly. And Saladin's kind of in the same point, he's like, please, let's just settle this quickly, you know? Oh my gosh.
At the conclusion of Christmas festivities on January 8, 1192, Richard ordered a retreat, framing the movement as a positive one towards Ascalon to diminish the deleterious effect on his army's morale. The unprotected town fell quickly. However, Richard's decision to refortify it in anticipation of his Egyptian offensive would ultimately prove to be the sticking point in negotiations for the next 8 months. After this, there was little military activity until spring, although neither commander would enjoy the respite. Saladin failed to embark on a winter campaign for the first time in 4 years, as a result of growing opposition from his northern emirs in the Jazira. Richard spent much of that time strengthening Jaffa's defenses, a decision that would pay significant dividends in the near future. In late April 1192, Richard received news from the Prior of Hereford that his brother John had overthrown Longchamp, the Lionheart's chancellor and designated regent,
Oh my gosh.
was now ruling England in Richard's name. Increasingly desperate to resolve matters in the east and return home,
It's like, freaking John. It's just, oh boy. Like, you're really feeling the tension, you know what I mean, guys? Like, you can feel the tension. Both sides are reaching a breaking point. Both of these leaders are reaching a point where it's like, oh my gosh, who's gonna break first? You could see why they came to an agreement, because like this is like a powder keg, you know what I mean?
The king concentrated his forces at Jaffa. Saladin, aware that he still lacked the force necessary to stop the Crusaders, and assuming the Holy City was still the target, poisoned or filled in the wells on the approaches to Jerusalem. He also dispatched first his younger son Al-Afdal and later his trusted brother Al-Adil north to bring the Jazira into line. News of the Sultan's weakness and the departure of his lieutenants soon reached the Crusader camp, and Richard hastened onward, capturing the key post of Derum following a 5-day siege on May 23rd. Derum's fall meant that Richard now held the last major fortress on the way to Egypt. Saladin's strategic base was now seriously threatened.
Wow.
Once again, Richard was presented with the choice: Egypt or Jerusalem.
Egypt, like, I mean, granted though, like, I think Egypt would be so much better, because, again, attacking the enemy's main, like, home, you know, strength, strategically is just, would basically be the biggest blow he could land on Saladin personally. But again, the Crusaders' internal issues, which has always been a bane in every Crusade's existence. It's like, you're gonna have people, and why is it always the French? Guys, it's always the French, you know, who go against the main grade and just argue, and it's just like, oh my gosh, you know, it's always the French in these Crusades.
Again, discussions flared up on what the best means to bring Saladin to the negotiating table were, and once again his army was bitterly divided. In the absence of any firm response from Saladin, who had pressed him vigorously all last summer, and with good sailing weather for 5 more months at least, striking Egypt was the logical choice. But Richard chose to press on towards Jerusalem. This time his army moved.
Imagine he had attacked Egypt, like if he hadn't had much pushback. You think that would have been the end of Saladin if he like just went straight? Like if Richard went for Egypt, right? And like disrupted Saladin's home base. I'm wondering if that would have made Saladin just kind of completely, if that would have broken him completely. That's kind of like another historical what if, I'm wondering if he had gone for that. Because again, it does seem like the logical choice. It seems like it would be the most, it would yield the most strategic benefit, but I'm not sure if it was because of just the constant division and the fear of losing, you know, men that he went back to Jerusalem. But yeah, if he could have gone for Egypt, I wonder how bad that would have ended up for Saladin. And if that would have like been the ultimate victory for the Christian Crusaders in a strategic sense, you know?
Moved more quickly, crossing territory that had taken them months in a matter of days.
Holy crap, they're speeding.
Even the kings falling ill could not slow them, and the army encamped at Bayat Nuba in early June. A few days later, while out hunting, the Lionheart saw the distant walls of Jerusalem. But once again, Crusader momentum slowed down. Overstretched supply lines from Jaffa and the growing recognition that he lacked both manpower and equipment for a full-blown siege weighed heavily on Richard. The approach of St. John's...
Not even bad neighbor and stone thrower can turn the tide for this. I'm sorry.
Day, the 24th, traditionally marked the beginning of the dry season in Palestine. With Saladin's successful blocking up of wells and cisterns, Richard's nearest water supply would be 2 miles away from the city itself.
Oh my gosh.
A simple assault on the Holy City, urged by the French knights, would result in casualties he could ill.
Oh my gosh, the French, why are you always like this? It's always, the French are always just attack. It's like, no, think. It's every crusade, guys. I swear, we've seen a lot of crusades on this channel. It's always the French doing this. Oh boy, the French. They never change. Never change.
Afford, but he was running short of other decisive options.
Oh my gosh.
On June 23rd, having received word from Bedouin spies that a large caravan was approaching Jerusalem from Egypt, Richard led a surprise assault, taking an abundance of food, baggage horses, and camels.
Ooh.
The survivors fled into the city, further depressing morale throughout the Muslim army. On July 1st, in extremity, and with many of his emirs fearful of meeting the same fate as the defenders of Acre, Saladin called a council of war that lasted for 3 days.
Oh my goodness.
Here, his charisma won out. Taking personal command of the army, he led it outside Jerusalem's walls for one final showdown with Richard. To his amazement, however, as his army moved towards Beit Nuba, there were no signs of the Crusader army. Richard had chosen to abandon his assault on the holy city once more, and was pulling back towards Ramla. Saladin could not believe his good fortune. As the Crusader...
Yeah, that could have been like a real, like, costly battle for either side, right? Because that would have been like the battle to like decide everything, but I guess both go on, you know?
Army retreated, its cohesion quickly disintegrated. French knights moved north towards Caesarea, while the English king went first to Jaffa, where he left a small force of weak and wounded soldiers, and then marched to Acre, along the same coastal road he had traveled the year before.
Do not be deceived by my withdrawal. The ram backs away in order to butt. Oh my goodness. He sent this to him? He's like, hey bro, I know I don't look strong, but just wait, I'm about to strike. Oh my gosh, what is Richard cooking right now?
Richard hoped to mask the gravity of the situation by reopening negotiations with a stern tone, lest Saladin realize the Crusaders were retreating. The bluff worked.
Wow.
But the Sultan, for his part, used Ascalon's fortifications as a means of prolonging negotiations, while quietly gathering reinforcements from Egypt and expecting additional troops to arrive from the now pacified Jazeera. Although his army of 7,000 to 10,000 was now considerably larger than his enemies, Saladin remained at Beit Nuba, biding his time. The moment he arrived in Acre on July 26th, Richard gathered a fleet of 36 galleys. Sending a portion north to Beirut, that evening he asked both Grand Masters' public blessing for a future voyage. Word quickly reached Saladin, who believed all signs pointed to Richard departing for home, and decided to strike quickly. All that evening and through the night, his men moved, coming before the walls of Jaffa early on the morning of July 27th. Since the Muslim army, composed of a large Arab and Bedouin cavalry corps with a small armored elite of Kurdish and Turkish Mamluks, was ill-suited to siege operations, Saladin ordered an immediate assault on the town. The small Christian garrison was surprised. The Sultan's men, motivated by prospects of a quick victory, pressed the defenders. But Richard's fortifications proved their worth, and the Muslims were beaten back. More importantly, the garrison was able to send word to Richard, beseeching his assistance. Over the next 3 days, the Christians prayed for their deliverance, while the frustrated Saladin brought up 6 siege engines to hasten their fall. By July 31st, these machines had shattered Jaffa's eastern gate and surrounding wall. "Forward!" shouted Saladin, spearheading the attack ahead of the elite Mamluks. A Christian soldier observed the dust shaking on the stone walls as the Sultan's charge thundered towards the city. Muslim cavalry swarmed the breach, overwhelming the defenders. Unable to hold their position, the Christians broke into smaller formations, fighting on the back foot as the battle moved into the streets. After an hour of fierce fighting, however, the Christians were driven off. Those fortunate enough ran to take refuge in the citadel. Others, however, were caught up in the brutal sack of the town. The assault completely shattered the nerves of Aubray de Reims, commander of Jaffa's defenses, but the Christian cause was saved by the actions of Ralph, newly ordained Bishop of Bethlehem. With consummate skill, the prelate negotiated a brief truce with Saladin to expire at the 9th hour of the following day. If Richard could not relieve Jaffa by then, all would be lost. But what of the king? When news of Saladin's assault reached Acre by the morning of the 28th, the king immediately sent criers through the streets, summoning all available men to this desperate relief expedition. All but the French answered the summons.
Of course.
That same day, a detachment of Templars and Hospitallers set out overland, while Richard boarded his royal ship, the Trenchmere, and, accompanied by 6 other galleys, headed south with favorable winds. Unfortunately for the Crusaders, fate and Saladin had other plans. The Sultan, anticipating Richard's relief effort, had erected a number of roadblocks for ambushes that stopped the military orders just beyond Caesarea. Then, after one day at sea, the wind died down, leaving Richard's galleys stranded near Haifa, faced with the insurmountable task of rowing the rest of the way.
Dang.
Fervent prayers went unanswered for 3 days, until, on the morning of the 31st, the winds rose once more. Urging his men to greater efforts, Richard and 2 other galleys outpaced the others, reaching Jaffa by the dead of night. But had he arrived in time?
Oh my gosh.
The early morning light of August
This is so tense, dude. Holy crap.
1st revealed Muslim banners along the walls as far as the eye could see. Making matters worse, soldiers encamped on the beach began opening fire to prevent a landing. Richard's heart must have sank in despair. Suddenly, a priest from the citadel leapt from the wall to the sands below. Miraculously avoiding the Muslim soldiers, he ran to the shore and swam out to Richard's ship.
Oh my.
Sometime later, he climbed on board. Haltingly, he told Richard of the remnants of the Christian garrison holding out in the citadel, and of the truce that would expire in a few hours. The news was electric. Richard, still only partially armored, immediately ordered his galleys towards shore.
Dude, this, just like, again, this series is such a back and forth. Like, one hand, Saladin's doing great, and then the next, it just keeps shifting, you know, the momentum. And it's like, oh my gosh. This is great. This is a real, clash right here.
The moment they grounded, Richard grabbed a crossbow and jumped off into waist-deep water, followed by his entourage. As the astonished Muslims watched, Richard shot his bolt, drew his sword, and charged. The heavily armored Crusaders pierced right through the thick formation of Muslim warriors.
Oh my god. Dude, the momentum, holy crap. Richard was like, it's like reinvigorated. The dude just Alexander the Greating over here and just cutting his way through. Oh my gosh. Wow, this dude's so Chad.
Though only a small group disembarked with Richard, their swords and lances cleared the way for the others who reached the shore. Startled at the Lionheart's audacity, Saladin's men turned and fled from the beach into Jaffa, with the enemy right on their heels. The battle carried over to the city as more and more crusaders rushed up the beach to join the attack, inspired by Richard's bravery. Back at the citadel,
The tone is shifting. The momentum has once again shifted. Oh my gosh, like just reinvigorated. Dude, that priest who jumped and went all the way there, oh my gosh, he might have just saved everything. Because Richard seemed like it could have possibly just been sad that think that this was all lost, but no, man. Holy crap.
the Christians could hear the unexpected battle taking place. Then, the sight of the king's lion standard flying from the outer walls gave new hope. As the fighting grew more intense and spread deeper into the streets, the defenders within the citadel steeled themselves before pouring out from their refuge. The immediate goal was to link up with Richard's host. However, Saladin's men fought fiercely, managing to slow down the spearhead of the Christian attack. Swarmed by Muslim warriors, Richard's contingent suffered losses as they grinded their way towards the citadel. Some groups in his entourage got separated in the chaos, as Saladin's men relentlessly tried to stem the tide. But the Christian forces did eventually join. A renewed push was on.
Oh my gosh.
Together, they threw the Muslim army into confusion, overwhelming them piecemeal in the streets. What was a fierce battle a few moments ago turned into a rout. The Sultan, just rising in his tent, could do nothing. His entire encampment was completely swept up in the panic as the troops tried to escape being trapped. Gradually, the Muslim army spilled out of the city, and order would not be restored for a couple of hours, until they reached Yatsar, a few kilometers away. As daylight waned, both armies endured a sleepless night. Men repaired their equipment, collected weapons from the fallen, and made preparations for the fight on the morrow. That same evening, Saladin was furious in his camp. Richard's unexpected appearance had stunned him, and he demanded an effective response from.
Yeah, dude, honestly, that's probably my favorite moment so far this entire series. That was like the perfect counter what Richard just did. Actually, it kind of gives me goosebumps, like chilled. Just him coming in and just instantly driving Saladin's forces out. Just, bro, like like revitalized completely.
His lieutenants. A brilliant commander himself, Saladin was aware that he still greatly outnumbered the Christian army, and sensing an insurmountable setback in morale should he order a retreat, the Sultan knew that he had to attempt a counterattack. The sooner the better, while Richard was still disorganized, and the defenders of Jaffa still weakened.
Oh my gosh, it just keeps going, oh my gosh, back and forth.
Collecting his forces over the next 2 days, he planned an operation that would feature both stealth and power. Richard anticipated that Saladin would strike again, and responded with both careful planning and bravado. Despite suffering from bouts of fever, he divided his time between repairing the breach alongside his men and hosting a few of Saladin's emirs, bragging about his plans to stay in the Holy Land through next Easter. Richard also welcomed reinforcements under Count Henri of Champagne, accompanied by Hospitallers and Templars, and a few horses from Caesarea. By nightfall on August 4th, Richard could count on 55 knights and 15 horses of indifferent quality, and about 2,000 to 3,000 doughty Genoese and Pisan bowmen. He confidently marched out and encamped with some knights outside Jaffa, on the same ground as Saladin the week before. Around
Richard ain't above bravado, huh? He's like not above like the flex.
midnight, members of Saladin's bodyguard made their way towards the Christian camp, intending to kidnap Richard.
Whoa. Okay, that's pretty ballsy. Holy crap. Man.
The first part of the Sultan's plan, to be followed by a diversionary thrust on Jaffa, while the main assault would eliminate the leaderless Christians in the field. As fate would have it, a Genoese archer walking outside the camp early on August the 5th saw the glittering of helmets from Saladin's guard, who had evidently gotten cold feet. He ran back into the camp, shouting a warning. Quickly roused, Richard threw on his mail shirt and prepared for action. With his left bolstered by the fortified church of St.
blow
Nicholas
my nose at you,
and
Saladin.
his right looping around to Jaffa's walls, Richard proposed an active defense, relying on his crossbowmen, whom he stationed in pairs, one loading, one firing at all times.
Smart.
Protecting them in front were footmen with lances fixed into the ground at an angle and holding a buckler to deflect arrows. Scattered tent pegs, half buried, were in place to slow down the expected assault. Richard himself, with a handful of knights on horseback, formed a mobile reserve. As the enemy made ready, he addressed his men. Adversities reveal virtues, just as prosperity hides them. Besides, there is nowhere to run, so you must stand firm. True men should either triumph courageously or die gloriously. The Muslim army...
Awesome words of encouragement there. We either win or we die now, guys. We're literally in the end game now.
Confident in their large numbers, poured against the Christian ranks. But they lacked the usual coordinated movements and struck without sophistication. Wave after wave halted at the line of lances and retreated before the crossbowmen's deadly barrage. As at Arsuf, Richard had a sixth sense for rushing up and down the line, appearing at every critical moment.
Yeah, the dude's in it. He's like jumping everywhere, making sure everything's going. He's micromanaging his army in that sense, just making sure to be everywhere as much as he can, and really keeping a hands-on, watchful eye over everything, which I really like about him. That's a great quality. And again, crossbows are such an underrated weapon in history. Like, they are really OP and great weapons. And you're seeing that. I like that system he has, trying to implement as much crossbow fire as he can in pairs, and a countless a non-stop barrage of that. Just smart. The guy's a genius on the battlefield.
Christian discipline held firm. Not a single feigned withdrawal could bait them into charging their foe. By 3 p.m., with the heat of midday beginning to ease, Richard gave the order for the crossbowmen to advance beyond their defensive shields and ordered his reserve to join him in a powerful charge. He was like a giant in battle, wrote one chronicler. His body was like brass, unyielding to any sort of weapon. His right hand brandished his sword with rapid strokes, slicing through the charging enemy, cutting them in two as he met them. Muslim morale gave way amidst the onslaught, and Saladin watched his...
The dude is a true warrior king, in the same vein as, like, Alexander the Great. He He's amazing.
His army melts slowly away once more. All but a few, for as Richard and his handful of knights reined in their mounts, a great shouting could be heard from Jaffa. Some of their compatriots, exhausted by the continuous assaults, had left their posts and fled to the safety of the galleys. Muslim contingents took advantage of their departure to infiltrate Jaffa once more, hoping to instill a new confidence in their side.
Oh my gosh.
With inexhaustible energy, Richard called to himself a handful of knights, men-at-arms, and crossbowmen. After driving the cowards back from the galleys and setting up an armed guard to discourage further cowardice, the king rode into Jaffa, precipitating a swift Saracen withdrawal.
Oh my gosh, dude. The energy, oh my gosh. Like, not only does he win here, he immediately loops back and is gonna charge it and go back to driving them. Bro, Richard's on another level. This guy's on one right now. He's just so Giga Chad. Oh my god. Again, just this series really plays with your emotions. On one hand, it's like, oh snap, the Muslims are they're in the city, they're about to maybe pull off the win, and then just like, nope, it keeps going. It's like a seesaw, you know what I mean? It's like one giant seesaw back and forth between. Oh my gosh, this is why I love this. This is what I was most excited for. The rivalry between Richard and Saladin is the stuff of legends, and I'm seeing it play out between two very competent and amazing men is fantastic. This is awesome. This is a rivalry, if I've ever seen one. One of the best in history.
That evening, both rulers counted the cost of the battle. The Muslims had lost 700 dead and 1,500 horses, many of whom were left on the field of battle. The Crusaders suffered a mere 2 deaths and an unspecified number of wounded.
Yeah, no way, just 2 people died. Yeah, that's very exaggerated. I imagine there's way more than 2, because no way, through all of that, only 2 guys died. Oh my gosh.
Hoping to maintain the illusion of power, Saladin sent word to Richard that he still intended to take both the king and the town. Richard, seriously ill from his exertions of the past few days, issued a defiant response. Nevertheless, both leaders and their armies were so thoroughly exhausted that negotiations began anew.
Yeah, they're both putting on they both have poker faces, you know? They're both putting on these acts of bravado, but I think, yeah, they're both at the exact same point of exhaustion. They're just the same. They really are the same. They deal with the same. They're both methodical. They're both patient. They're both dealing with internal strife, trying to keep their armies and their men together. Both putting on these brave faces. They're just so similar. It's like cool.
On September 3rd, a truce was reached. Hostilities would be suspended for 3 years. The Christians ceded Ascalon and Derham and recognized Acre as the new capital of the Holy Land. Jerusalem was left in Muslim hands. In return, Saladin gave his word to protect all Christian pilgrims to Jerusalem. By September 5th, large portions of the Muslim army started disbanding, while others demolished Ascalon's fortifications under Crusader oversight. The following day, Richard rode north to Acre. On October 9th, he set sail for home, or so he thought. The truce endured for several reasons. Richard's capture of Cyprus with its abundant food supply gave crusading kingdoms little incentive to push beyond their thin coastal strip. For the Muslims, the moral energy generated by Saladin when he declared a jihad in 1187 was simply exhausted. Moreover, the Sultan's sudden death in March 1193 fractured his kingdom, with one son Al-Aziz governing in Egypt and another Al-Afdal controlling Syria.
Yeah, it goes to show you, Saladin was the uniting force for the Muslims, and his... I could see how his death would kind of create some type of division. Rest in peace, Saladin. Bro was a real Chad. Saladin, an enemy who you can respect and admire. You know? Rip Saladin. Like, rest in peace, dude.
The subsequent infighting was not resolved until the Mongol invasions of the 1250s, which threatened the Near East more than the Crusaders ever did. Only a renewed spirit of jihad would push back these intruders at
We actually covered this battle. I did a reaction to it, which was a really awesome battle with the, Mongol invasions and so on and so forth.
And then proceed to dismantle the remaining Crusader kingdoms. On a personal level, the Third Crusade provides us with two leaders who, for all their cultural differences, came to power in an atmosphere of religious zealotry and intense backstabbing politics. That they were able to transcend these conditions and treat each other as men of honor, even chivalrously, is remarkable.
Definitely.
For lovers of military history around the world, Acre, Arsuf, and Jaffa cemented King Richard's reputation as the epitome of a courageous ruler and a charismatic warrior, just as Saladin's victory at Hattin and the conquest of the imposing fortresses of the Holy Land affirmed him as one of the greatest leaders in the Muslim world. While other rulers...
Both of them are Giga Chads. Like, real recognizes real is what is like the saying, and they both recognized they were both real ones, you know?
Shied away from a prolonged war, Richard and Saladin remained committed. Yet where others single-mindedly pursued obsolete strategic goals, the English king and the Ayyubid Sultan were capable of understanding the complications of holding the holy city and sought creative ways to win a more lasting peace in Palestine. It is with indomitable spirit, capable of triumphing in challenging conditions and against incredible odds, that these two men had rightfully earned their place in history. Their legacy endures to this day. Thank you for staying until the end of the video.
Saladin kept hold of the Holy Land against fervorous Christian attempts to retake it. He died in March of 1193 of yellow fever. Richard, during his 10-year reign, had spent less than 6 months in England. How based of him. He's like, oh, screw that, I'll have to go do something cool in the Holy Land. He died in April of 1199, shot by a crossbowman while besieging a rebellious vassal. The siege and battle before Jaffa was a fitting climax to the ongoing rivalry between two of the most charismatic warriors of the Crusades, Richard I and Saladin. The Battle of Jaffa was my favorite, personally, of all the things we covered. Just the way that it had seemed lost, and then Richard, realizing that it's not, jumped off his ship and just led that assault and fought. It's just, that was goosebumps. That was chills. That was my favorite. The Battle of Jaffa was my personal favorite of all the events of the Third Crusade. That one was like, that one gave me chills. I would love to see something like that portrayed, because holy crap, talk about just one of the best comebacks. Again, just the way that it kept going. This entire event was one giant momentum shift after another, a tug of war, a seesaw, just back and forth. That's so great. Honestly, that was awesome. Okay. The Treaty of Jaffa, established on September 2nd, 1192, stopped the killings between the Muslims and the Christians for at least a time. And that, my friends, is the official end of the Third Crusade. That was awesome. History March once again. Oh, snap. Wait.
If you enjoyed watching Attack...
Okay, once again, he delivered. And yeah, I'm gonna end the video right here. But overall, that was fantastic. I love that. That was cinema.